Thank you all for joining us today. I'm Bryce Gardner, principal at Cherry Bekaert, and focused on our analytics and BI practice, and been a Tableau user and Tableau advocate for about 10 years now. And as we go through some things today, we've had the luck of getting to work with many people in the law firm legal space, and wanted to share just a few opening comments to get our minds in how some people have really taken advantage of what analytics can do. Additionally to what I do for Cherry Bekaert, I am an adjunct professor at the graduate school in Durham at Duke University in the business school, helping students learn how to make the most of data visualization as they prepare in their careers to work in the analytics space. So to get started, what I really want to do is think about how law firms can make the most of analytics. How can they take advantage? What are some of the key challenges, business drivers, and business outcomes that we're seeing with law firm clients and in the legal space? And then also take you real quickly as well into how we've used analytics all the way into the courtroom. The two panelists that'll be joining us here in just a little bit are both very well versed in both sides of this equation. And so we'll get them introduced here in just a couple of minutes. But to think about law firm analytics, we always like to think about how exactly, what do we need to know? What are some of the key things at a law firm from an operational perspective do we really need to understand? Whether we're looking at billable hours, whether we're looking at a realized rate, whether we're thinking about utilization and total revenue, and how that growth is playing out. When we start thinking about the different types of people that we represent, I know some law firms are focused specifically on the defense side of the equation, while others represent a lot of plaintiffs. Or we just might be doing legal services for individuals. How those elements play together are a lot of the things that we need to look at when we're thinking about analyzing where we go. And a lot of times, whether we're thinking about matter management and how that plays into account, or our financial systems, or our time and billing systems, or our document management systems, how do we tie all of that information together? Well, what we've been able to see over the last 10 years, and especially in the last 7, where we've worked with several law firms of all shapes and sizes, is understanding that a lot of times those systems are living in disparate areas, and pulling reporting together or pulling analytics together becomes somewhat of the challenge. And leveraging Tableau and Tableau's capabilities to get at, the drilling in capabilities, finding our top clients, our bottom clients, hours billed, our employees that might be falling behind in hours billed, and then really inviting trends and understanding how that plays out by location, and leveraging all the tools that data visualization gives us. A lot of times when we do that, then we need to take that next deep level, looking into a single location, understanding how their area breaks out, being able to look at individual offices by different roles, and understanding matter by matter where we are seeing revenue and expense and how those revenues are playing out. It's also really important to understand our clients. So as we're thinking about clients and we're looking at the number of matters we might have for one of our corporate clients in play at any given time, how is our time being allocated to those clients? And how do we really start to think about where we're spending that time, who's spending that time on those clients, and what is the trend? I think the other thing that becomes really important that we've seen with some of our law firm clients is them really thinking about how do they get this in the hands of some of their clients? How do they put this kind of information in the hands of a corporate general counsel so they have constant update on where a matter sits, what billing is looking like, and even stretching into what does work in progress look like? How is that playing out? Knowing that work in progress is to be reviewed and billed, but it can still give and it can still give a view into that exercise of what's happening on their behalf at all times with the firm, helping cement some of that value with the client. Being able to communicate that in a place that oftentimes was sort of that unknown area that oftentimes clients might ask about, wonder, want to know, and created a lot of administration. Also understanding work in progress better, understanding what work in progress we have from an aging standpoint, knowing what's been billed, what hasn't been billed, what's in flight, knowing where our team leaders are relative to the work in progress they have outstanding, where we have the most matter by matter, to really understand how all of that flows into what we're trying to accomplish. So as we think about more of the day-to-day activities, operations, financial impact, and what happens inside the firm, we've also taken an approach and worked with several firms on how do we not just leverage analytics to think about how we look at operations, but how can we take this to extend our capabilities within the practice of law all the way into the courtroom. And so what we have put together is this concept of what happens when we apply analytics. And Dan is going to talk about this more extensively during our panel discussion. But what happens when we start to apply what we know is valuable as analytics, and we start to think about the elements that go into a jury trial? What happens when we take analytics into the courtroom and we start to think about jurors and details of the matter that could impact how a jury feels about it, the different categories of questions we're going to ask during jury selection, how all of that gets played in, and how we weight that information to ultimately end up with a profile of jurors that give us insight into what that jury looks like, who we're going to be asking questions of before we ever start asking our first questions in voir dire or voir dire. I have found out very clearly that it depends on what part of the country you're in, which way that is pronounced. And I've been corrected on both pronunciations. But understanding a little bit more about the jury before we ask our first question, knowing what are some of the biases or some of the elements that we need to get at, how does analytics really start to play into that? And then how does that get us to individual juror profiles to start to understand where a specific juror falls in the overall scheme of the jury that we're looking at, so that when we're ready to impanel a jury, that we understand using analytics where we might have concerns about who's currently sitting in our jury box relative to what we're trying to achieve on behalf of our client. So as I tee up these very specific use cases of looking at where we are in the courtroom, looking at what we do inside the practice, this is where I want to bring in our panelists. Because Denise Tyson is the head of finance and operations at Tyson Mendez, and she has been working relentlessly, as the best word I can say, over the last months and year to really get analytics embedded into their organization from an operational perspective. And she brings the perspective of a national firm with over 150 attorneys nationwide. And then also bring in Dan Church. Dan Church brings the perspective of having used analytics in the courtroom in multiple trials and being able to see exactly how that impacts a firm with a real focus on litigation in the courtroom. So first, I'd like to welcome both of you, and then I'm going to turn it back over to Henry and let him start to lead and moderate our discussion as a panel. Thank you to both for joining us today.
Yeah, and I think it makes the most sense to start off with a question for both Denise and Dan. What started your analytics journey within your firm?
I'm happy to go first. Well, thank you so much for that introduction, Bryce. And Henry, thank you for the question and welcome everyone. And thank you for being here. About a year ago, as Bryce mentioned, the firm started to do a general ledger conversion, which taking us from an old QuickBooks format to a time management system of ProLaw, which some of you may be familiar with. And ProLaw is not very user friendly. So we wanted to get a pretty front end dashboard, better user experience. So we started talking about how to do that, and we decided that we would use Tableau as that format. And so it started out as a general ledger project, but it ended up as a operational data analytics project that has been ongoing, and we're still making tweaks, and we're actually in phase 6 of our project. We started phase 1 was, as I said, sort of general ledger-ish, and now we're up to phase 6 already on all the things that analytics can help us do from an operational standpoint.
Fantastic. Dan, did you have anything to add there?
Sure. You know, my exposure is a little different, but I probably tried 75 jury trials in my life, maybe closer to 100, and I thought I knew quite a bit about jury selection until I tried a case in St. Louis that I ended up with a fairly bad outcome. And the issue that surfaced in that case was that my selection of the jury resulted in some people on the panel, particularly one individual, that someone who was rogue, and I had some problems with trying to figure out where I went wrong and how I went wrong. And then I conceded to myself that I really needed some help. And so I got a hold of Bryce, who I knew from a long time, and I said, Bryce, it seems to me that we've got to figure out a way to utilize some analytics that are available through social media and the public domain to allow us to better understand what jurors are and what their background and some information that one cannot obtain through questioning the panel through ordinary questioning that we're permitted to do. And so that background data then would be critical to our ability to understand what type of juror we want to impanel, what we're looking for, and what the opportunity is. Because as I've told a number of professionals, now we're out here really selling a lawsuit. We have the unique opportunity to select whether it be 6 or 12 buyers of that lawsuit. So we need to figure out who the buyers are, what characteristics do we want those buyers to have that best match with our lawsuit. And so that's how we go about doing it. And what information do we need to have so we can do that? And then Bryce and I have refined that system over the course of 4 trials, and we can talk a little bit about that. But that's really how we got started.
Fantastic. And I'm excited to dive in a little deeper on both of the ways in which your 2 firms are using analytics. Let's start with Denise. Denise, you mentioned it began in the general ledger and some of the accounting areas of the business. I'm curious how that's impacted your firm's leadership specifically. Maybe it could be from a day-to-day action or just how they change how they go about performing their duties, given this infuse of data and analytics.
I would say that the leadership team looks at Tableau constantly. It's real-time data. It pulls directly from time management system. And so they are in it all the time. We've been live for about 6 months now, which is just about the amount of time the firm's been working from home. And so it's really given them the ability to just fish. They understand the data, they know how to get it, they know what buttons to press. And it actually leads to much better questions, because we no longer have that discussion around what are the numbers. It's all about why are the numbers and what do we do with the numbers. And it's just been a phenomenal tool that we use every day. Yeah.
Would you be willing to share an example or a story of how this has played out internally to maybe positively impact the business?
Yeah, I'd say Bryce actually touched on it during his introduction about WIP, so work in process. there's, you know better than I do that WIP is what's not been billed yet. And so about a year ago, the firm felt that it had a collections issue. But through the use of analytics, I was able to compare billing to WIP and show the firm management that we didn't have a collections issue, we had a billing issue. We weren't billing out the WIP fast enough. It was accumulating to such a level that we figured out that we needed to hire more billers and to get the pre-bill process to be a little more attuned with speed and getting information back to the back office faster. And it took us a couple of months to get it in line, but now everybody knows to look at WIP compared to billing and that what the relationship should be. And it's just been phenomenal because the best part about it is to be able to show somebody the information in a picture format as opposed to numbers, because I know that numbers aren't everybody's thing. And so pictures are really helping, especially the way Bryce had that one picture. You can do it in a circle, you can do it in a bar graph, you can do it up and down. It's just so helpful to be able to convert the data into pictures to help people understand it better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and obviously having cash on hand, I think we can all agree that that's important, especially in today's age. So thank you for sharing that. We've shown you a lot of interesting dashboards and end products that clearly are valuable, but one thing we're kind of not talking about is what is the hard, what makes this so difficult? So I'd be curious, Denise, in your perspective, what's the hard part about getting and deploying analytics in your practice?
I think it comes back to the old adage of change is hard. Change is hard for people. Where's my paper report? Where's that email I used to get every Friday? And so it's taken a little bit of time to get the users to get more comfortable with it, but it happened more rapidly than I had anticipated. So once you can get people to use the tool and to buy into the fact that it is a much better tool than the way we used to do it, then it's easy. And like I said, the pictures really help. It's instead of just handing someone a piece of paper with a bunch of numbers on it that they have to interpret themselves, the pictures tell the story. And so there was a little bit of a transition to get people to buy in, but once they bought in, they were all in.
Yeah, and I can imagine, I mean, it's not exactly easy to deliver paper reports these days when people aren't in the office together. I would be curious from Bryce's perspective, which of these analytics use cases that you shared or ones that you haven't shared yet, which of these are most relevant given today's climate that we're not in the same office oftentimes and we are working separately?
Yeah, I mean, I think the ability to disseminate the information to people who are remote, whether we've seen, especially in law firms, where we've seen the matter management side of the world, they need to share where different components are, how progress is being made, their ability to leverage Tableau, leverage the fact that I can be anywhere in the world, I can log into the server, it's secure, I can do all those things I don't worry about, but I can get a status on where we are with a client, where we are in process on any given matter is one of the places. I think the other one I alluded to when I was showing the demo, I think as a client of law firms, as someone who has seen the concern, I think one that a lot of times people have shied away from, and I know I probably had at least 3 or 4 people in the audience who cringed, Henry, when I said somebody was sharing WIP outside the firm before it had been reviewed, because that's always been, we'll get a partner or we'll get the billing attorney to review it before we ever put anything in front of the client. I think in a couple of cases with law firms that we've worked with, that's actually increased their value proposition. So being able to share analytics and start to project where it's going, where they're at, so they can get their head around it. And knowing with education, to Denise's point about change is the hardest thing in the world. It's way harder than the analytics. We can do predictive and prescriptive analytics all day. That's easier than change. but getting people to understand and educate that, hey, clients start to see that, they start to understand, hey, there is a lot of lift that's going to this. There are a lot of people doing a lot of things on my behalf, and it's helpful. And so I think that's one area where we've been really surprised with some firms really wanting to jump into that to kind of differentiate themselves. And especially as people look at alternative fee arrangements, that ability to have their hands on the controls of understanding where WIP is, where other things are in billing situations that aren't just time and hours has also made a big difference, right? So lots of different elements of change that are going on in the space, but lots of opportunities as well to put it to work and share.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Obviously, it is a lot of people on this call probably wish they could just snap their fingers and Tableau would appear and all the necessary people who they need buy-in from would be all on board. But as we discussed earlier, change is hard. So, a kind of open question to the group: how do you go about catalyzing change? What conversations do you need to have? Who needs to be involved? How would you approach that?
For us, it started at the top of the firm. The named partners, I had to start with them, get them to buy in. I think the other thing that made it easy for them is they live on their iPad. And so that was actually one of the challenges when I was looking all the different analytics that we were putting together with Bryce's team. Was everyone was used to working on a PC or a Mac. And I said to them, you got to do it on an iPad. And they're like, what do you mean? I said, that's how they get their data. They're going to use an iPad. So we had to kind of make sure that we could provide it to them the way they wanted it. I couldn't give it to them the way I wanted it. I had to give it to them the way that they wanted it.
Yeah, Henry, I think this would be a really good one for Dan, because I know as he was introducing it to trial teams, this was interesting in how to introduce change.
Well, as you point out, Bryce, change is very difficult, and it's not been as well received as I thought it would be, the use of data analytics at trial. But I will echo the comment about getting the law firm involved in analytics. By the way, it is a partner issue. You've got to get buy-in at that level. But backtracking to trial work, to be successful at this side of the game, you've got to be able to make sure that you're willing to try things that are a little bit different. And this certainly was going out on the edge and trying something different. And so once we started working on the analytics through these trials, we were trying to determine, what we needed to measure, what was the information we needed. And then once we got it, how could we actually evaluate it? So Bryce and I worked on this, and we decided we needed to come up with an ideal juror, and that's the first thing you got to do. Pick what your ideal juror looks like, give a little background and biographical information about that ideal juror, and then from that, you can then establish, and we work on a point system. And so the ideal juror, say, being 100 points, and then you assign points based upon answers to questions during voir dire, based on their background, their socioeconomic background, various things that we were able to learn from social media through Bryce's group that enabled us to learn so much more about each juror that then we could place a monetary value on each juror. And based upon that, we could then establish what jurors filled the actual criteria that we wanted for them to be seated at our case, and what quadrants did we have them plotted in that they were closer to the quadrants that we needed them in. So that was sort of the kind of the process we went through to get involved in this system, and it, I think it has been a slow pickup. Bryce and I presented to a couple of national trial groups, and we're beginning to get some traction. Unfortunately, the coronavirus has put a shut the door on jury trials this year. So it's tough because we would have had some actually this year that we were going to utilize the the data analytic aspect of jury selection. And as we've gotten through the 4 trials we've worked, I think we've refined it in each level and become better and better at the ability to utilize the system. We also knew that as many lawyers who try cases know, you don't have much time when you get to select your jurors, or when you need to strike a juror for cause, or if you're going to have a peremptory challenge. And so you need to have the data available to you rapidly. You need to be able to make a decision instantly or almost instantly, depending on how the judge handles the voir dire. But you've got to be able to move quickly and be nimble and utilize the data. So having Bryce and sometimes someone with this group in the courtroom with us, compiling the data on their laptops while the voir dire is being conducted is how it works. And then once we complete the voir dire, we then have the opportunity to review the data and categorize our jurors or prospective jurors based upon how they score. So the system actually works quite well, and it works in a very heated environment, if you will, and it works in an environment that you have to be able to make quick decisions on what to do, because you don't have the benefit of mulling over this information usually for much time. Most of the time, you're either making a decision on the spot, or you may have an opportunity to discuss something for 3 or 4, 5 minutes at the most, and then you make a decision on, is this a juror we want? Is this a juror we don't want? So it has been a huge benefit, as I will say. The 4 times that we've used it, Bryce and I, we've won every case. So if that speaks well to the outcome of it, I'd say it does. I think it speaks to itself.
Hey, Henry, let me add to that too as well. I think the thing that we recognize as 2 critical components for what Dan is talking about that I want to definitely highlight, it's that speed, the speed in the courtroom, and in the Tableau world, the ability to embed this in an application, because now I'm going to tie Dan and Denise together here, in that they are tied to their iPads, right? What they're tied to even more so in the courtroom is paper. And paper doesn't lend itself well to speed. And what with Tableau's capabilities to render the pictures, to render the quadrants that Dan referred to drop jurors into, and to be able to do that in an embedded way that can happen on an iPad in a courtroom in real time, really is what the platform, Henry, enables, right? That is something that you couldn't do with an Excel listing of jurors. It's not something you could do. It's that ability to take advantage of all the components that Tableau brings to the table. It's embedded capabilities, it's real-time connectivity to data. It doesn't have to extract it. All of those elements are what really enable what Dan was just talking about, and the ability to now facilitate it in a way that people are still comfortable with. I think that's a big part that can't be overlooked, because we all know that change part is hard, as they articulated.
Yeah. So fast forwarding a year ago, or whenever this, Dan, you mentioned an example of the selection of a juror who maybe wasn't favorable for you. In hindsight, let's say you had something like this in place where you could better leverage data for the selection process. How might would you have sniffed out that individual maybe, not being favorable for your motive?
As I mentioned earlier, Henry, I think there are certain things that we can't learn through questions that we're permitted to ask jurors. And so some of the things that we were able to get through Tableau and through the use of analytics would have been critical to probably my decision to not keep this juror on. And things like we're able to learn things like the income that each juror has, whether they own a home, live in an apartment, do they own a car, do they own a boat, do they give to charities? What charities do they give to? What is their political affiliation? What are some of their hobbies? You know, are they a NASCAR fan? You know, things like that that we've been able to learn through social media, through the use of analytics, that would have allowed me to better profile this juror to recognize, wow, this really isn't somebody who answered questions in a more favorable way during voir dire that I could actually have looked at and would have had a very negative score, and I would have never impaneled him. But unfortunately, because he did actually, as it turns out, he also lied about a lot of things. But it probably, even had he, with those lies, it would have enabled me to better understand the profile of that particular juror and recognize, wow, I don't want this guy. This is not my buyer. And what this has done in these other trials, Henry, has allowed us to actually identify critical jurors, some of which I frankly would probably not have impaneled. Some of which I viewed their jobs, or maybe I felt like they're based on their position towards viewing various things socially or otherwise. I may not think that they're the right juror for our case. However, because I learned more about them, the charities that they may give to, maybe their income, some of those things outweigh some of the possible negatives. And then the real tough part, and as Bryce knows, is it's not the jurors that score 90 to 100 that are hard, or the ones that score 0 to 20 that are hard. It's the jurors on the scores from 45 to 70 that really create us heartburn. And so then you start to kind of get into some of these other issues about what are some of these other things about them that we're learning from their social media background information that we're able to get from the public forums. And wow, we start to see a trend, and that trend we want people that look a bit more like this. So we're able to look at that and actually put together a profile that better suits what we're looking for. So that's the critical component that we can't get. And you cannot get this through regular, old-fashioned, traditional voir dire questions that we're permitted to ask. So it's really critical.
Well, thanks for sharing. We did actually have a question in the chat. Somebody asks, we are currently building our dashboards. How long did it take for your firm to put them together? So any advice from the panelists around content creation, connecting to data sources, really just like some of the difficulties or advice you might give early on when firms are just getting started would be beneficial.
Well, this is not a paid promotion, but don't be misled. I didn't do much of the work. I just had a piece of paper and a pen, and I would draw out what I wanted and what the circles should look like and what the data should be in it. And Bryce's team did all the heavy lifting. Bryce's team did the connectivity for us from ProLaw to Tableau. Bryce's team picked the colors. Bryce's team made everything beautiful. I really just had an idea of what I thought would be valuable information to the partners, and I laid it out physically, and then they would give it to me, and then I would look at it and see it made sense, it didn't make sense, and then I would change it if needed. But the thing about the dashboard is trying to figure out what it is that you actually want to measure. Obviously, you want to measure billable hours, but you want to measure billable hours by category, partner associate, or by office, or by client. And so there's so many drill downs that you can do that's the next level of it.
I'll add to that. I actually know customers who, before they do anything, they create a prototype on a whiteboard or on a piece of paper, like Denise just said, and then they can really visualize that, and they use that as the iterative process before they even dive into Tableau, and that helps them a lot. Just kind of an interesting segue there, but initially, the hardest part at times is just connecting to data, and you have technical teams that support you here at Tableau who can help you identify if there are data sources available for what you want to connect to. There's also other APIs and connectors, but Bryce probably has some thoughts on this too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think what the beauty of Tableau is it's the model that you want it to be. Like Denise wanted us to be kind of their hands and fingers on the keyboard and make some things happen. And she came up with these phenomenal ideas of how to put them of what she wanted to see. I think for anybody out there in the audience who is thinking about this or contemplating how they get further faster with Tableau, I think for them, you always want to start with the questions. Denise really thought through her side of the equation. What is important? What matters? What are the most important things? And then when you start to put those together and you start to design and connect to the data that you need to answer those most important questions, the dashboards and the data connections come together really quickly. It's when you just kind of take that amorphous view of, hey, we want analytics, right? It really is a focus on what you need to know. And it's not on the, it's not just about the tool and how the tool interacts, because the Tableau makes that part easy. It's the part of how do we get to what matters to our firm? How do we get to how we slice it? And then now let's go do it and not be afraid to know that when we answer some questions that it's going to generate, about 10 more questions because now we have something in front of us we haven't seen. And so I think that's one of the big ways to do it. Henry, you're on mute.
Thank you very much. We had another question come in about how law firms we touched on a few use cases. It sounds like there's some interest around use cases outside of work in progress, operations, and jury selection. Is there anything else, maybe just in general, elevating intelligence, financial dashboards, marketing, business development? Is there anything else anyone can add there?
Denise, I don't know if you want to add anything there, but I mean, we're one of our biggest use cases with one of our law firm clients was marketing and pipeline and event management. Understanding, we all have these scenarios where we set up events where we're talking about a specific legal topic and we're inviting clients or potential clients to help them get educated. Well, what's the pipeline flow from that to actually having a matter that we're working with them as a client? So I think when you start to think about the data that you collect, whether it's in a lot of times, I would say sometimes those are not they're in more unstructured data sets, and they're in Excel, or they're in a file that we get to download from our registration software. That's the other beauty of working with Tableau is it doesn't care where the data lives. It's agnostic. So many tools needed in a certain format or in a certain way, or it has to be part of the matter management system or part of the financial system. That ability to start to pull those things together from a registration system to a client billing system and how it all comes together is where it fits. I'll let Denise add to that on other use cases, but I know marketing and events has been a big one with several of our clients.
Yeah, like I said in the beginning, we started out thinking we were going to use it for accounting purposes, but we actually ended up using it mostly for operational purposes. And now we're back to the accounting function where we are looking at it from a financial statement standpoint. We can generate financial statements real time. We can drill into the expenses, like you said. So the marketing was X this month and Y last month, and then we can see it right in front of us. So it's not just for matter related purposes.
Fantastic. Yeah. There's another question around, we mentioned a lot of KPIs, fees billed, collected year to date, aged WIP, attorney utilization rate. Are there any other, just from a KPI perspective, Denise or Bryce or Dan, that you'd want to call out that are top of mind for your firms? And then how do you define, if there is a process, how do you define whether or not, those should be used?
One of the things that we just started focusing on was we've always counted case receipts, but now what we're counting is case receipts from what clients, now are they up or down? And if they're up, great, that gives the partners the ability to call up someone and thank them for something as opposed to asking for something. But if they're down, then we have the next question is why is it down? And so that's the next thing that we have to look into. But there is, like Bryce said, you start out at the high level of what is billing, what is WIP, but that's not really what you want to know. You want to know the why behind it and where is it coming from. And so it's just, if you can think of it, you can create it in Tableau.
And there's a question here about training. I get this all the time from customers. It's funny because usually it's, how do I train my salespeople to use Tableau dashboards? But in this case, it's how do I train my attorneys to use Tableau dashboards? Is there any, once the content's built, the question was around, what do you do? Do you create reference cards? How do you educate them on maybe setting up a subscription, alert, a download? This is more of a people process, not a technology side of the coin. I can take this question. Typically, when people deploy Tableau, and they need to train an end user who maybe they wouldn't define as technically savvy, but the dashboard's already created. What I see as an effective approach is having a mandatory introduction meeting, 30 minutes, where you introduce the dashboard to all the end users. You say why we have it, and then you just show them how they interact. And then oftentimes what I see as helpful in organizations is to have either a Slack channel or a Microsoft Teams channel or some sort of office hours or recurring, easily accessible knowledge source where people can go to when they have questions. I would also, if I were you, seek feedback, because one of the biggest reasons why people don't use a Tableau dashboard that's built for them is because it's not that good or it doesn't answer their question. So the best thing you can do as you roll it out and educate them on how to use it is solicit their feedback on what they would change. If anyone else has any thoughts on the process around getting people to use Tableau content, open to feedback there as well.
I agree with that. It's you show it to them and let everybody take a look at it, get a feel for it. And then next week, show it to them again, show them something else, show them what to do. It can't be broken. That's the other thing about it. Like you can't press a button or erase the data. And so it's just always going to refresh and be right there in case if you think you're going to make a mistake, you're not really making a mistake.
Someone had a question about using Tableau in non-contentious matters. This is a term that maybe I'm not quite as familiar with. I don't know if anybody on the call who has a legal background has information on answering this one.
Dan, I don't know whether you want that, but non-contentious matters. Yeah, we've just seen people use it, like I said earlier, in external facing, not only to big, to like their big general counsel corporate type client, but we've also seen it just for some basic information sharing about progress and other elements to all clients. And just in understanding where matters stand, where they're at in process of different items that are step by step. But Dan, if you have anything to add on how you think that would play out, feel free.
I think Bryce, that one of the things that we're beginning to see in the litigation arena is some of our clients are wanting to have more information and data about the status of the case, what similar cases have settled, where are they settling at, where is there a verdict range, if there has been done trial. and how much money is it going to take to get to point A to point B relative to settlement. So I think that the sophistication level that we're going to see through analytics, through the insurance carriers, through our corporate clients that we represent in litigated matters, but I think it can be applied across the board to a lot of things. I think it can be applied in business transactions, merger acquisitions. I think it can be applied in all those arenas very well as to how you're progressing on something. What do you reasonably anticipate, the anticipated cost to be to complete the project? Has something gone awry, and what's happened? How's that impacted the project, or how's that impacted your particular matter? So I think there's a grand use for this in non-litigated arenas. I think that analytics is going to become more prevalent in the whole legal arena, whether it's going to be in guardianships, conservatorships, all sorts of arenas where it can have a vast play, estate planning. There's going to be a lot of places where I think it can have a meaningful input, and people are going to be able to utilize it much better, help us to be a better predictor, because our job too is our clients want to know the outcome, whether it's going to be, what's going to happen with this trial, are we going to be able to settle, when can we settle, how can we settle? All those issues we are being challenged more specifically by our clients to give meaningful input on those information. And so the more data we have, I think the better off we're going to be able to serve our clients' needs. And I think our clients are going to be looking at that data internally as well. And I would be surprised to see a lot of the corporate clients becoming much more analytically attuned to how to analyze cases, for instance, from point A to point Z, and how you resolve them and when and where.
Yeah, and Henry, one more thing, Dan speaking there, that's why you have panels. It always makes you think of something else that you forgot to say. But, one of the places we see it at Cherry Bekaert is an full service accounting firm, and we do a lot of work with M&A activity. There's a lot of what we're doing with Tableau and analytics that are helping drive the transaction elements. So when you think about something that is not courtroom driven or is not specific legal matter driven, but is another area, being able to add value in what gets delivered and how it gets delivered during the M&A process is a big area that we are using Tableau in ourselves as part of our business. So I know we're about out of time, so I'll quit talking.
Okay, I got one more question, and then we can close things out. But I want to know, where does the data come from? I talked to a customer the other day who had a plan to use Asana, which is a project management software, and marry it with data coming from a source system called Adrent. But I'm curious, where does most of this legal data come from?
Go, Denise. Where does it all live?
In our world, it lives in our time management system called ProLaw, which is a elite Thomson Reuters elite product. We also are pulling data from QuickBooks.
And Bryce, you probably can answer this better than I, but our data comes from a lot of the social media background information that we're able to obtain. Some of it was Facebook, but a lot of other social media, public arena information that you're able to garner about people that are on our panel or prospective jurors that are on the panel. So that's from a trial perspective where you get that data. You can probably be more specific if you'd like, Brian.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's all because when you're at trial and you have judges who would like to object to you using certain things, which I have learned very clearly, that it all comes from publicly available sources, number one. Because if you dare step into the water of something that shouldn't be publicly available, you start risking all sorts of other challenges. But you also to think about it in a different perspective as you're doing stuff in real time, jurors answer questionnaires as jurors, and all that information is made available to the trial attorneys and the trial team. And so that becomes part of the analysis. And then in real time, what Dan talks about is where the data flows from is, besides publicly available sources where you can get information, it's basically marketing information and demographic information. You also can then glean from their questionnaires, and you also can, to build your analysis, you can also leverage from how they answer questions. Right, that's a big part of what happens in the courtroom in that process that Dan referred to. Is you're getting your base profile from all their demographic and socially available information, but then you're also tying it to how they're answering questions that are relevant to what you're trying to do in the voir dire process. So
I'll add one thing to that real quick, Bryce, too, is the other thing that we've done is I generally share an outline of my voir dire with Bryce in advance, and then we have a meeting to prep. But some of that enables us to also, if we have the benefit of being able to get the identity of the jurors in advance of Bryce coming, sometimes we get them 20 minutes before your voir dire starts. Sometimes we get them the Friday before the Monday. But be that as it may, either way, it allows us to develop some questions, pinpoint some questions that we may want to ask, refine some questions that we may want to ask that will allow us to get answers to help Bryce and do the analytics part of it so that we can do a better job of analyzing those jurors. So I do share it with Bryce, I do share it with the team so that we can develop a better questioning opportunity and getting better information. So that is a critical component that I think should be shared with everybody listening.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. So we just have 5 minutes left, and I just want to say thank you, Bryce, Denise, and Dan, for your contributions to this webinar. The thing that I'll leave the audience with is the way that I think about Tableau is it's not a data analytics software. I mean, it is, but it's not. Really, what it is it is a vehicle through which you start never had before conversations based on what you're learning from data, whether those be billing conversations, whether those be conversations in the courtroom, as we discussed today, different operational or financial conversations, but that's really what it is. And I think that in today's world where it's harder to communicate because we're all separate, data is another avenue where you can effectively create and have new, much needed conversations. So I'll leave you with those thoughts. If you have if your questions weren't answered, Chelsea on our team is going to follow up with you. If you have any additional questions, I think Bryce's email is on the chat. But thanks to everybody for contributing. And if anyone has any other thoughts, that's it.
thank you, Henry, and thank you, our panelists. Appreciate it, and thank you all for attending.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.